but it's hot swap. Don't worry about it, kids. It's fine.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Day 5 of Resurrection of the Overmind. If you haven't been keeping up with the previous episodes of this series, be sure to check them out. Otherwise, what we'll be covering today probably won't make sense to you. So we are moving forward with the final testing of Overmind's hardware configuration, making sure everything is legitimately working. In the last episode, we think we determined everything is working, but we don't have all the gear installed in the system yet. So our first task is to finish putting the system together. So this is the current state of the system. We've got our ASRock motherboard chilling here with our test 9400 GT graphics card hooked up to a monitor. We've mounted the CPU block for the H100i cooler, which is residing here on this removable, I'm not even sure what you would call this, part of this server rack chassis here. Oh, let's not break our SATA power cables there. Good work. We've got the RAM and CPU installed there. This motherboard is going to get installed into the case. We've got our original motherboard under there in the darkness, which we're going to remove. We've also got a bit of modification to do on the drive configuration. Oh, let me step around all the junk that I have on the floor, get you to the front. As you can see here, I have two 3.5-inch hot swap drive bays, one of which is open at the moment. That makes it real easy to access the drives, especially when this is in a rack, because otherwise I would need to pull it out of the rack and open up the top like it is now, which is especially inconvenient when this system is not equipped with sliding rails. The drive configuration, though, is changing slightly. I've swapped the OS drive to a 2.5-inch SSD, which I could mount in this using a bracket, but I'd rather have a couple sections of 2.5-inch hot swap bays available for that and the games drive, which I'm also going to be swapping soon from a 250 gigabyte SSD over to a 512 as well. I like keeping most of my game files local and not relying on Steam Cloud, primarily because of my internet speed. And obviously down here I have a disk drive. That is actually a Blu-ray drive. I spent a lot of money on it because I wanted to be able to play Blu-rays. How many times do you think I've used the Blu-ray capacity of that drive? You guessed it, 0. So that was totally worth it, but it has been reliable, and it has burnt many DVDs in its lifetime, so I am still happy with the purchase. Something I've considered doing, though, to accommodate the number of drives that I'm looking to have in a hot swap capacity, is removing the disk drive to an external 5.25 drive enclosure, connect it via USB, and just have it sit on top of the chassis. And then swap, or rather install a device that is 2 bays for 5.25 but has 3 2.5 SSD hot swap bays, and then leave one of these 3.5 in place. So I could have in theory, 3 SSDs occupying this space here, and then one of these devices remaining, or reorient that however it'd be appropriate. Unfortunately, I don't have the funds for that now, because why have funds for things when you can not have funds for things? That's a good reason, right? So I'm going to leave the configuration as is. This top guy will have my WD Black 1 terabyte scratch disk, and this guy I will leave open for emergency, quote unquote, or emergency asterisk, additional storage opportunities. I believe this motherboard has 6. I can't see in there, it's too dark, because who needs light for a video? 6 SATA ports, so I should have no problem using these 3 and then 2 internal SSDs, one of which is mounted here, and the other of which will be mounted on the bottom of this tray and slide in using these devices. So, everything is pretty straightforward from this point. The only change to the plan, let me reach over here. I got in finally from Amazon the CPU cleaning kit by Arctic Clean. Or no, that's the... What is the company that this is by?
Arctic Clean is the product name. Arctic Silver is the name of the company. I thought that was the name of the product, but it is not. How embarrassed I am. I'm not a real nerd, obviously. Alright, let's get to it. I just spent 5 minutes looking for my handy dandy screwdriver. I had it sitting right here in front of the case. What a nub. Most of the time nowadays, people use magnetic parts trays and magnetic mats to hold all their screws and stuff together that they are pulling out from computers such as this. But back when I was doing this, before I knew those existed, I adopted the method of using these styrofoam cups and putting common parts in the cups just to keep track of them and to keep parts organized. So that's what I'm using for this part of the project. Okay, looks like I've gotten all the motherboard screws out. Let's make sure we disconnect everything from the I/O plate of the motherboard, and we should be able to just pick it up and remove it. Hey, success. I didn't miss any. Almost did earlier. A couple of the screws inside there were black, but instead of the standard silver, but we successfully removed the motherboard. Unfortunately, it looks like we've got a bad power delivery system on this one, so she will sit in a box. Ooh, we got some hair hanging off of her. This one will sit in a box until a time that it's needed again in an emergency capacity, or who knows, maybe we'll have a project where we can use a real low power CPU and get some additional life out of this unit. I'm going to use this opportunity to dust out the bottom of the case. I blew it out with compressed air maybe a week or so ago, but apparently that wasn't effective at reaching here underneath the motherboard. I'm also going to remove the I/O shield and install the new one. I'm not going to tell you the number of times that I have forgotten to install the I/O shield until after assembling the computer, but it is more than I would care to share. Alright, so before we actually put the motherboard in place, let's make sure there aren't any remove before use things, like we've got some down here that we can peel off after installation, which is good. I really should have checked this before we fired it up for testing, but I don't see anything that we missed, so that's good. I'll be careful when I'm putting it in. I'll be careful to make sure that we have all of the motherboard standoffs in place inside the case, so we can, so we're not missing any of the mounting points. So I'm just lining it up by sight here. Okay, it looks like we are missing a few, so I'm going to need to go find the hardware box for this case and see if I have some additional standoffs. Fortunately, I keep this tray of various parts around. I've got some unfortunately long screws. I'm not sure what those are for, but I have a selection of standoffs here. Hopefully I have the right size for this case. Otherwise, this whole part of the video was for nothing. I also have this handy little tool. It slips onto a Phillips bit on a screwdriver, and it allows you to loosen or tighten the standoff directly. What is that, a 6-sided? A hex? I'm not quite sure what this type is called, but it is an adapter to allow you to screw it on, which is really convenient. Unfortunately, it is also really hard to use without the standoffs falling out. Luckily, they're loose enough I can thread them in by hand and then crank them down with the screwdriver. And I do have the right size for this case. Fantastic! Because, you know, not all standoffs are the same size. That'd be way too easy. It just occurred to me that you might not know what a motherboard standoff is. All of these holes in the bottom of the chassis are different mounting options for motherboards. On top, or screwed into some of them, are little standoffs which lift the motherboard off of the bottom of the chassis to prevent the motherboard from short-circuiting with the metal in the chassis. As you can see, we've got a lot of different options here, and I was just missing a few of them. I believe I've got them all in now, but let's double check. Okay, it looks like we're good. Let's carefully position the motherboard. Without sliding it across the standoffs, which could scrape off parts of it, we'll slide it into the I/O shield so that the ports appear properly on the back. And then we'll lock it down into place. Make sure all of our ports look good. I can't quite tell about the back. Let me move some of this stuff around. Okay, good thing I looked. It looks like one of our PS2 ports is not properly aligned. I may not be able to do anything about it, but let's try. Now is the time. Not 10 years down the road when I have to service this machine again. Just kidding, I'll have to service it once every couple of months. Okay, that looks a lot better. I'll do a test fit with some USB connections that I have sitting here. And of course I need to flip the USB upside down. Nope, it looks like I'm still not aligned properly. Boy, we are being temperamental today. Whoop, and I just popped the I/O shield out. Cool. The reason it wasn't fitting is this little tiny tab right here that is meant to protect the USB 3.1 Type-C connector. I just bent it off and now dropped it. Cool. I meant to bend it off. I did not mean to drop it, though. Now I need to figure out where that is so it doesn't cause a short later on. It's not on the motherboard, which is good. Maybe it just hit the ground. Because who doesn't like jagged pieces of metal around? Alright, let's reinstall the I/O shield now. Alright, let's reseat the motherboard and see if we can get these connectors lined up this time. Alright, that's feeling a lot better. Perfect. Alright, let's sink some of these screws back in. Yeah, I'm definitely going to run out of screws early. I'm going to have to go procure some more. Fantastic. Aha. Found a selection of screws, some of which look like they should fit. So let's give it a go, see if we can find any that will work. Not only did I add standoffs to this, but the original motherboard didn't have all of its screws in place. So I'm hunting after probably 6 screws. Okay, it looks like none of these screws are going to work. Let me see if I can find the original hardware box for this case. Boy, I'm thrilled. I just found an entire bag of screws for this specific motherboard, including motherboard standoffs, and I found a small little plastic case to store them all in. What a great find. Unfortunately, not all the screws are the ones that I need, so let's separate them out. Alright, we've got the motherboard firmly screwed down in place. Let's get the bulk of our power cables connected now. So this is what the system looks like with most of its cables cleaned up and out of the way. Obviously we haven't installed our GTX 980 yet, which is chilling right there. We removed the CPU cooler, which is sitting right there. I haven't installed that yet just because of the added complication it induces when this section of the case is in place. There are our 2 hot swap bays, which are not actually screwed down. It's not that easy to screw them in with the orientation that they're in relative to these 2 drive bays. If I were to take one or both of these out, it would be much easier to screw those down, but I kind of need those, so I'm going to leave them in place. And I don't move the case around that often, so it's not that big a deal. 20 plus 4 pin here, 8 pin CPU power there in the dark. You can see the yellow cable. RAM is installed. So now we are going to start cabling up the chassis connectors, all of which are here. Then we can start rebuilding the mess that I just yanked out of there, because there was some extra stuff, and with the configuration change, it's easier to start fresh sometimes. Most of the connectors on the motherboard in relation to the chassis front panel connectors are labeled, but some of them are a little bit more obscure in terms of their labeling. So always use the manual when you're plugging stuff back in. It gives you a nice breakout usually of how things should go. So this is what our front panel connector section looks like, plus the motherboard speaker there. Not too pretty to look at, but I'm pretty sure I got everything in the right way. Ultimately, I don't really rely on the front panel connectors of this case too much. The only things I really need are the power and reset switches. Now, one trick that we need to figure out, or that I've actually already figured out using the motherboard manual, this case has two non-standard headers for its USB connectors. Fortunately, they are labeled, and the motherboard manual is also labeled. Which one are we supposed to be looking at here? There we go. It's that guy. No need for focus, though. Using that, we are able to determine which of these, or how the orientation of these plugs is to be when we plug them in. I'm glad this motherboard manual is very specific about its I/O configuration in relation to these front panel headers. I wasn't actually able to determine which orientation the old these non-standard USB connectors were to go in the old motherboard. So I'm happy that I'll finally be able to use the front panel USB on this case, assuming I've done it right. And that is the end for the front panel connections. I've got a few more fan connections here, which are jerry-rigged into a I guess it's not so much jerry-rigged. They're just connected to a Molex leg, which will plug into the power supply. So those two, the two that are in the front of the case, will be on full blast the entire time, but the two mounted to the H100i will be fan speed controlled. There's these, there is two of these, or maybe only one. Oh no, there's the second one. There are two of these sort of purple and black cables, which are labeled hard drive LED. Those actually connect to the hot swap bays that are in the front of the case. I'm not going to use the LEDs on them though. I won't be using them for hot swap while the machine is running, so the LEDs wouldn't do me much good. Plus, I've only got one section of hard drive LED connectors, and I'm using that to the chassis connector. Now that it is time to install the hard drives and SSDs in Overmind, it is time to say goodbye to the MacBook Windows USB SSD installation. This was definitely one of the shorter-lived projects that I've ever done to this scale, but it did work well while I used it. It's pretty responsive, especially because it's USB 3 external drives, and everything worked well, and I was able to edit videos from this station. So, well done. So I've reclaimed my two SSDs and my scratch hard drive from the portable MacBook installation, and it turns out that the older drives that I was using, the 250 gigabyte drives, are 850 EVOs. So I'm staying with the EVO line, plus WD Black. Now I need to install these back in the Overmind chassis. The WD Black is pretty easy. All I need to do is install it in the hot swap drive bay here, which is actually really difficult to do one-handed. So far so good. I'm just going to slide it out and make sure it seats firmly down in there. It's not screwed in like I said before, so kind of got to be careful with it, just a little bit. No. Boy, this is harder than it looks. Don't try this at home, kids. But it's hot swap. Don't worry about it, kids. It's fine. Oh, okay. Come on, close. There we go. We are going to call that good. Now, these other two are going to need to be installed in a single bay sled, which is this one. Now this guy is the old OS drive, so I'll have another 850 EVO of the 250 gigabyte variety just chilling for now. I was considering doing RAID 0 between the two for my games drive, just to make it uber fast and to prevent myself from having to buy another 860 EVO in the 500 gigabyte variety. But that seems like a bad idea. Not sure if this motherboard has onboard RAID or not, but even if it did, striping two drives is generally not the greatest idea when it comes to SSDs. You'll get way more performance than you reckon, and you have double the chance of failure. So I'd rather I'd rather just stick with one larger drive and demote this drive to a less mission critical task. So let's swap this guy out for the new OS drive. I'm trying not to get these drives confused because I would hate to mount the wrong one on this and have to go through the whole process again. Alright, now that we've got our new OS drive mounted, let's mount the old games drive. Because these SSDs aren't vibration sensitive, I'm only putting in 2 screws each, plus I'm kind of low on screws right now. But I'm not at all concerned about the drives being damaged by excess vibrations of the fans that will be next to them on either side. So now in a single drive slot, 3.5 drive slot that is, I've got 2 SSDs mounted. The only tough part is getting these connectors to connect residing so close to each other. Now I get to use these guys and mount the entire sled on into the chassis. Somehow I pulled 6 SATA cables out of this case and I definitely only had 5 devices connected. Alright, so we've got SATA connected to everything. I'm using blue and red cables, but there isn't any organization to it. Up next, SATA power. Okay, so we've got SATA power in. I was able to remove one of these, well good, now that it's coiled around everything. Well, one of these SATA daisy chainers, so that's good. I'm using just enough ports in the machine to make this work. I was also able to remove, so far, a Molex modular power lead off of the power supply. I've not seen any need for it because I'm already using one, which I have this curious Molex to 6-pin converter hanging off of it as well. I thought that was for a graphics card, but I'm looking at the power supply, and I do have this 8 and 6-pin connector already ready to go. So I might be able to ditch this extra adapter. In fact, I'm just going to say we ditched it. It's gone. And then the only need for this Molex leg is these 2 fans. Don't you love when you accidentally hit the stop recording button? It's great. The only reason for this Molex leg is these 2 fans, because they come straight with Molex connectors, because that is the kind of fan that they put in this chassis. If we had fans with traditional 3 or 4-pin fan power connectors, I could plug them straight into the motherboard and lose this Molex leg altogether. I could also switch out the fans, but I don't really want to. These are okay, and they're not too loud, and I'm pretty happy with them. So I'm going to leave them until they break, probably. Now, we're not looking too bad right now, but remember, this bar goes right in here. So all of these cables are going to have to either pass underneath it or around it in some way. So this case, while it looks pretty open right now, is going to get real cramped real quick. Alright, now that we've got all of our cables connected, for the most part, I'm going to go ahead and mount the CPU block to the CPU now. Earlier I said I was going to use the ArctiClean cleaning kit to clean the CPU and the block a little bit extra, but for the sake of testing the machine, I'm going to do what we've done before and just apply some thermal paste and use as is. Before I set this machine up for long-term use, I will go back and clean it. Before I apply thermal paste, let's do a test fit and make sure everything is still oriented properly. So that's generally what it'll look like. Obviously, this will be sitting down in the chassis, but I think that'll work just fine. It'll be right about there. I'm half worried that it would that these tubes would interfere with the power supply modular cables, but I can't think of an orientation where this would work better. So we're going to go with it like this. So now that we've got the CPU block reconnected, we are left with all of these fan headers coming off of the H100i that will need to connect back up to these fans. The pump itself, it's difficult to see, but it connects to the to the motherboard CPU fan connector, just to tell the motherboard that, hey, I'm alive, don't think that there isn't a fan here. And, which, that's a great feature, but this motherboard actually has several CPU fan headers, which is a fantastic feature if you've got a if you've got an air cooler with more than one fan, that is a great solution as opposed to using the chassis fan connectors. This motherboard has tons of fan connectors, which I really appreciate because my cases traditionally have a lot of fans. I just wish this one, the two fans in the front of the case, weren't on Molex power, because then I could have them be fan controlled. But we can't have everything. So now I'm going to finish wiring up the fans connected to the radiator. Boy, that radiator's, some of those fins are bent. Ugh. I'll finish connecting those up, and then we will install this this plate back in the middle of the case. So I haven't screwed down this middle plate yet, but that's within about a ½ inch of where it will go. And as you can see, all the cables fit nicely underneath it, with the exception of this, which is just butting up against the radiator. But I'm not concerned about that in the slightest. So now I'm going... one note that I missed actually a second ago. The H100i has a USB internal connection, which I have connected right there to allow the computer to communicate with the H100i and control it via Corsair's software. So now I'm going to install the GTX 980 in its appropriate location, and we should be ready to fire up the system. Let's get our two power connectors routed to the proper location. This card requires an 8-pin and a 6-pin power connector from your power supply. So this card is definitely not for the faint of heart. Alright, so this is what the system looks like right now. We've got all the components installed and hooked up, unless I've forgotten something. This bar is still loose, but it's okay. We'll just make sure nothing is rubbing on the fans, and we'll be happy. Let me connect a few peripherals and a monitor, and we'll see if we can get the system to post. Alright, so we have everything connected. One note about this system, we are going to try to boot, well, actually I'm not sure what drive the system will boot from, but even if it boots from the OS drive, that had the MacBook installation, so when it boots from those drivers, the system will probably crash immediately. But that's okay, as long as we get a post message on the monitor, that means we have succeeded. So the power supply has already been turned on. Let's apply power to the system and see what we get. Moment of truth. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Let's see what she does. Okay, staying on the boot screen for a while. Cool. Oh. Did it overwrite the Windows logo with the ASRock logo? What? Yes, it did. I didn't know motherboards could do that, and I just realized that this is a Windows To Go installation, so it loaded the new drivers, and it's probably cool. Nice. That's my first experience with Windows To Go, so that is fantastic. Let's boot into the system and see what we can do. Yep, this is definitely... Yep, everything's looking good. Windows isn't activated anymore, but that's okay. We'll be doing a reinstall on the new hardware anyways. Now let's get our stress testing utility AIDA64 set up, and we'll run some tests. Alright, so we're ready to start stress testing the system. I've got HW Monitor from CPU ID here ready to go to accurately monitor our temperatures. Right now the FX8350's package temperature is hanging just above 30 degrees Celsius, which is expected for the temperature this time of night. Actually, we're just past midnight my time. And I have AIDA64 here set up to stress the CPU, FPU, cache, and system memory. We're not stressing the GPU because I don't have my graphics drivers installed. And we're not stressing the local disks because I don't want to kill my local disks. So we're going to hit start and let it run for a little bit. I'm planning to let this system run all night just to make sure that it is completely stable as much as we can until we actually get some software installed and start using it for real. One final thing, now that the system is relatively finalized in terms of its hardware config, This still needs to be screwed down, but I don't want to screw this down until we confirm that I don't have to dig around anymore. I am going to put on the case lid to simulate a real cooling environment. This thing is notoriously difficult to actually get on the case, so we'll see if I can do it here on camera. This is only 95% realistic because the GPU is not going to be stressing in there along with the CPU. But that's what it traditionally looks like, and hopefully we will survive the stress test. So let me set the camera back in its location. Right now we are just a minute into the stress test. Yeah, just a minute and a half in. The CPU socket temperature is already up to 51 degrees Celsius. The package is only sitting at 41, which is good. We've only risen 10 degrees and we're at full load. Let's make sure we are at full load. Yeah, we are. It shouldn't take that long. Yep, we are doing good. Let's get that up there. I don't have enough monitor real estate on this tiny monitor. So I'm going to come back in 20 minutes or so and monitor this. Otherwise, I'm going to let it run all night, and hopefully tomorrow morning I'll come back and everything will look good. Alright, so quick little update here. I have finished the stress testing for now, and it passed. I'm still going to do the extended burn-in test with the GPU being stressed as well, but we're not quite there yet. So I've gone through and reinstalled Windows on the new OS drive that's in the machine, and that went well. Unfortunately, once I got into the system, I realized that the games drive SSD, which contains like 200 gigabytes of my game files, both saves and just regular Steam files, is not being detected. And I just reseated the connections there on the drive itself, and everything was fine. And still nothing has changed. So now I've got to remove the 980 again to get to the SATA connectors that are below it to make sure that those are connected and that nothing else is actually wrong with that drive. If something is wrong, I'm going to be in some very serious trouble regarding all my ongoing series. Okay, so I've got the machine detecting all the drives again. At first I thought it was just a bad SATA cable. This was the replacement I was going to use, but it turns out it is actually a bad SATA port on the motherboard, which is concerning because that is usually a sign of something greater being wrong. Nothing else has registered as not working so far, but I'm going to keep an eye on it and do perhaps a more thorough test than I would have otherwise during this final phase of testing, because if that is not working, there could be something else that is also not working. Alright, so now that we've got that game's SSD reinstalled and working properly, it is time to stress the system for real. I have installed the graphics driver, so all the monitors are working again. So I will be able to stress the GPU this time, and also simultaneously monitor everything, which is fantastic. I've already started the stress test. Sorry for the sloppy focus here. I'm using all of the stress options from IDA64, and we'll be monitoring the temperatures and etc. through HW monitor over here, and just general system usage from Task Manager. So I'll keep you updated. Alright, we're about 5 minutes into the stress test and everything is looking good. The CPU is hanging at about 43, 45 degrees Celsius, which is what we were seeing in the previous tests, so nothing shocking there. The GTX 980 is hanging out between 65 and 70 degrees, and it may pick up as we progress on through the test, but it's safe up to about 90 under a stress test. I wouldn't leave it at that temperature for that long, but its fans are on auto, so it should take care of itself as much as it needs to. Alright, we are about 4 hours into the stress test and everything is looking good. The GPU's hanging out at about 75 degrees Celsius and the CPU is at about 52, which makes sense with the GPU cooking in there as well. The airflow in the case just isn't able to handle it. but it looks like we are staying at about that level relative to the ambient air temperature. So I'm going to call this good and give you a short explanation of the method I've been using in the stress testing. Obviously, I'm just using Ada64 to stress the system, but what is the point of stress testing? Earlier, the point was to determine where the faulty hardware was located, or what part of the system the fault was in. But once we replace the component, stress testing should become unnecessary, but I have been using it just to confirm that everything is still working. Most of the time, stress testing is used to determine whether or not an overclock has been successfully dialed in. When that's happening, people will tend to stress a system for many hours and sometimes even days at a time just to ensure that the system is working. Some folks don't like to do that. They figure it's just adding more wear and tear to their machine. But I am just trying to ensure that everything is going to run smoothly, especially because this machine is going immediately into production and its workload could be rendering videos for days on end with very little breaks. But considering the previous tests, considering the nature of the failures we were having, I am confident in saying, my voice shakes a little bit when I say confident, in saying that we have resolved the issues this machine was experiencing and that the new parts are working up to spec, which is fantastic. That means most of our troubles are gone. All I need to do now is finish configuring the system, getting it up to speed, and hopefully we can wrap this video series up.
So I've got some good news and I've got some bad news for you, and both of those points happen to be the same information. Overmind is up and running perfectly, just as well as it ever did, if not better, thanks to the new upgraded processor. So it has been hard at work over the last 24 hours downloading my game libraries, at least the parts that I couldn't keep local due to space restrictions on my game SSD. It's only got about 50 gigabytes left, and some of these newer AAA titles are taking a massive amounts of space. So eventually I'm going to need to upgrade that drive to a 500 gigabyte or even larger. But the good news is that is all manageable. Everything is working great, and I'll be able to start recording videos again soon, unless I run into any unforeseen issues. This video series, I had originally planned to have two sort of ideas tagged onto the end of it. One of those was sort of a studio tour, and the second of those was a workflow overview of how I actually create videos. And I could show that to you while I was going through and checking everything, making sure everything was working. But both of those two ideas are really suited for their own standalone videos. So I'm not going to tag those onto the end of this one. I'm going to opt to create a full series later on in the evolution of RTM as we ramp production back up. To what end, I'm not sure, but we will cross that bridge when we come to it. In the meantime, my internet has been pegged downloading Star Wars Battlefront 2015, I think is the year that one came out. I don't own Battlefront 2 2017 or 2018, whatever year it was released in yet, but I'm going to make my way through Battlefront 2015 and enjoy and have some content for you to enjoy there. I do own the Ultimate Edition, so I have all of the DLC that has come out over the last few years, and I am planning to make some content with it, so hopefully you'll enjoy that. I'm also planning to release a State of RTM video once I get settled, giving you official closure on what series will be stopping, being discontinued without being finished, and where I intend to take the channel and stuff like that. So stay tuned for that. I'm still working out details on everything, but everything is going well. I'm pretty pleased with everything. For now, if you'd like to friend me on Steam, you can find me RTM space Randy, or you might be able to search me by my account name, which is the Sound McGee, not sure. If you want to friend me on Origin, I am the Sound McGee. I do accept your friend requests on those, so feel free to send those my way if you're interested. I also have an RTM Steam group where I post announcements occasionally and things like that, so check that out. I don't have anything on Origin, but I'm not sure they have the facilities to support things like that. So, we'll see where that goes. Otherwise, I think that's it. I am glad that this series is coming to an end, but I'm also glad that I'm going to be able to produce videos after this point. So, I think we're in a good place over here at RTM right now. Star Wars posters. That is it. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.